right, peeps, welcome to the Culture and People Cast. Today we have Karen Reed with us. Karen, in a few sentences, would you tell us who you are and what you do?
I am so happy to do that, Anna. Thank you so much for having me. So I am the CEO and Chief Confidence Creator of Speaker Dynamics, which is a communications training firm that I founded about 10 years ago. And our focus is on creating confident communicators across any platform. So that can be in person, on camera, or through virtual communication tools. And as you can imagine, that last one has been a primary focus over the past year.
Oh, I bet you guys were blowing up with that need. And you know, I think that's a real gap because even if you weren't blowing up, everybody take note of this because I've worked with coaches like you, Karen, when I've done CEO transitions, or there's a team working with the CEO, so specifically on the presentation skills of that CEO, and I'm usually coaching leadership behind the scenes. But to the fact that you can help leaders bridge this engagement gap of remote work or hybrid work on camera, how do we do that? How do I navigate the logistics of in the room, the energy that's happening here and the energy that's happening on camera, right? Is that sort of where you could add value as well?
For sure. And it really requires a different approach whenever you are using a camera to communicate. And one of the challenges that I see people often not recognize is that it requires a totally different skill set. So when I am doing any sort of on-camera communication, I am thinking about the camera as a conduit to my conversation partner. It is not me performing to a piece of glass, but rather a way of reaching the person on the other side. And for leaders to lead through the lens is really critical, because that's the way you're going to be able to connect, engage, and inspire. And if you don't treat that camera as the way to reach your people, then you're missing out on a huge opportunity, because otherwise there's just going to be this disconnect, and people will not be inspired to take the actions that you want them to.
I have to ask this question of you because this has come up in a lot of interviews and a lot of conversations that I've had over the past year. What's your opinion on a team or a group event on camera muting cameras?
Okay, so it depends on the size of the event.
Okay.
So I draw a distinction between what I would call a meeting and what I'd call a webinar. So if you've got 100 people on a webinar where there's not expected to be a lot of engagement, having your camera on can often be an unnecessary burden, because in that case, you're likely not going to be able to see everybody anyway, because you'd have to like flip through the pages. So I would say reserve video on for the times when the meetings are designed to be about collaboration, about discussion, about decision-making, because that's when it's really critical, because you want to be able to read everybody's nonverbals. You know, as a speaker, it's important for you to use your body language to best convey intent. And as a speaker, you also want to be able to see people's reactions physically, so that you can gauge how your message is resonating. You know, if somebody's nodding along, that can be all the input that you need to know, okay, I can continue on. But if you see somebody looking like this, or if you see them nodding off, then you know you need to adjust your delivery to just be able to react to that. So having your video on, critical if you're having a meeting where, say, you got like 5 to 7 people in the room. If you've got 100 people on the call, not necessary for everybody to have their video on. But one thing I think is interesting to consider, though, is maybe having a few people who volunteer to have their camera on, just so that you still have a little bit of that nonverbal feedback to play off of. And this is something that's kind of evolving right now, because initially people were either, okay, always have your video on, or never have your video on. But now there's a more intentional approach being taken where people are trying to strategize. Okay, when is it really important? When is it not as important? Because we all have heard about Zoom fatigue and WebEx weariness, and that is legit. And so you need to be more conscious of how we are impacting people's endurance and levels of attention.
Yes, and that goes to facilitation skills, right? Because I see that there is an opportunity for leaders to, in my words, up level, right? I don't think that we had a lot of great leadership happening before the pandemic. And I feel like we were really scrappy this year. And so maybe we did a little bit of more scrappy leadership where we might have changed some of our habits, but we still need to move to sustainable. So I'm still asking leaders to just rethink your whole role as a leader, right?
Oh, for sure.
What are
Absolutely.
the and as facilitator is one of those big hats right now. Right?
For sure. And one of the things that I always recommend is making sure that you are very proactive in your
Yeah.
facilitation. So for example, conversation can be really stilted and stunted in a virtual environment. A lot of that is due to the fact that people don't know when it's their turn to speak, when they have the floor. So if I am, for example, facilitating a workshop, I am reading the room after I ask a question to see if somebody might have something to say. So for example, if somebody leans towards the camera, that's usually a precursor to them wanting to speak up. If somebody is unmuting themselves, before they even say a word, I'm saying, hey, Anna, it looks like you have something to say. And you might say, Karen, I actually don't have anything to say, and that's fine. But I'd rather have you be proactively asking for input by name than letting there not be any sort of dialogue because people are afraid to speak up.
Yes. Oh my gosh, Karen, I feel like I have 100 questions that I know would be so helpful for people. So we're going to have to book time on our bar from the best, because I feel like there's some definite best practices that you could give for both leaders and individuals on this, especially as we're moving into, many of us, hybrid work environments. So let's put a pin in that for sure. Okay. So want to make sure we give enough time to the topic for culture and people. If you had to give a tactical piece of advice, where, I'm hearing a lot of leaders are questioning engagement right now, worried about that. Am I going to be able to keep my people? By the way, I think you should be worried about that. We're entering a talent market. But
Sure.
let's get tactical. What could a leader or a company do in these areas to create some safe space in these meetings to improve people and culture practices?
I think a lot of it has to do with some of the best practices of meetings that existed prior to the pandemic, and kind of reshaping them a bit for I hate this phrase, but the new normal that we're in. And this is all kind of discussed in our book, Suddenly Virtual. And my co-author is a meeting scientist, Dr. Joseph Allen, who has done a ton of research related to what happened to meetings as a result of the pandemic. But what he found was that the old best practices still very much hold true. So things like making the meeting relevant for everybody by providing an agenda so people know what's going to be discussed and they can come better prepared for the meeting itself. Making sure that you only have the people in the room who need to be there. It becomes very unwieldy in a virtual environment, having more than 5 to 7 people if you want to actually have an active discussion. That's kind of like the sweet spot. And just making sure that you are cognizant of people's time and not just allowing the calendar application to default the length of a meeting. If you want to take 20 minutes for a meeting, that's what the agenda, requires. Don't put an hour block of time on their calendar, because then they don't have time to get their other work done. So having some of that white space be preserved is a great way as a leader to say, hey, I understand. It's exhausting to be in this environment. You need time to, take a stretch break and just reboot your brain. So being very aware of the wellness aspect of this, I think, is really critical. So helping people to be able to have that balance, because now that, a lot of us are working from home, there is some balance that is a bit out of whack. And yes, productivity has not dipped, but we're all working really long days. So we're missing out on some of the balance in our lives that we had prior to, because we can't check out. We work where we live.
Yeah, we don't have that commute time anymore, that lunchtime or the cooler talk. I agree with you.
Yeah.
And look, this is another area where we can move from scrappy to sustainable, redoing our meetings, rethinking, right? The question I'm always asking myself, my team, I help companies ask it, what could we be doing better or differently? It's not to say that what we did before was complete crap. It's to say, could we continue to rethink with the new data we have, with the new environment that we have, with the new people who've joined our team? What serves us best going forward? So I love that challenge for you. And I think, to me, that equates to capacity. A lot of leaders think there's a performance program, a performance problem, either in a team or an individual, when really it could be a capability issue. But I find that we don't have clarity on the capability until we look at capacity.
Right.
Most people are over capacity, so therefore it's really hard to tell if they are over their heads on capabilities.
Right. And you don't have that time to task switch between back-to-back meetings. And so you don't have time to really, debrief on what you just did, or to prepare for what's coming up. And so it's important that, the leaders set the standard for that. and they are mindful of that. So, I think there's a lot that can be done just by setting a good example, at the part of leadership and saying, okay, for example, I've heard about, some of my clients who have said, no meeting Friday, and just giving people an opportunity to catch up on the work that they can't do whenever they're in these back-to-back Zoom meetings. But it's also a matter of having a culture where the first question that you ask is, should this be a meeting? Because a lot of times, because we don't have that social lubrication whenever we're co-located, which means like we don't have the opportunity to bump into people at the water cooler or to pop into their office on the way down the hall just to say, oh, about that, can we just follow up quick? Instead, a lot of these human touch points have immediately defaulted to a video call. And that's why you end up having these back-to-back-to-back meetings. So first I would say, let people ask the question, should this be a meeting at all? If it's information transfer, maybe it's an email, maybe it's, sending out a message on a Slack channel, maybe it is a text or even a phone call. But if it is something where you have a complex message to deliver or you have to have collaboration, then yes, it's a meeting. And if it's a meeting virtual, then you should be including video.
Agreed. Awesome, Karen. Okay, let's do 2 quick shout outs. We have just about a minute left. So let's do the first one. So who would you call out that's doing good work in the ring around culture and people?
Okay, so I'm going to say Dr. Joseph Allen, who is my co-author, because he is amazing. He's like the foremost leader in meeting science, and meetings matter more today than ever because it's the way we continue to connect. So he has all the data to support best practices.
Awesome. And then how about a favorite resource of yours that has advanced your own thinking related to culture and people?
So I'm going to point to a person and all of her resources. Dory Clark is somebody who I'm a big fan of, and she actually teaches at Duke University, where I teach as well, so on a fairly regular basis. And she has a really great voice that is always pointing towards authenticity. She has a unique perspective on managing others as well as managing oneself. And I respect that. I really respect how she leads with authenticity. And that's something that I try to do as well.
Oh, I love it so much, Karen. Thank you so much for all you're doing for culture and people to help us in the virtual environment and the non-virtual environment. I just appreciate all you're doing.
Oh, thank you, Anna. This has been super fun.
Of course, peace and progress, everybody.